All right, so as we look at Daniel 2, the dream that God gave to Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel comes in and says, okay, this is your dream. You saw the statue. The head was made of gold. The arms and breast were made of silver. The waist was made of bronze. The legs and feet were made of iron, and the toes, the feet were mixed with iron and clay. He said, that's your dream. And he said, then you saw a mountain, and a rock was cut out of the mountain, and it comes in and slams into the statue at its feet, and the whole statue is destroyed, and that rock becomes a great mountain. He said, okay, that's your dream. Here's the meaning of it. And so let's turn over to chapter 2. He tells him what the dream was that I just shared with you. And then he says, verse 36, this was the dream. Now we shall tell its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdoms, the power, the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand, and has caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold. So, what do the parts of the statue represent? Kingdoms. And the first one is Babylon, or Nebuchadnezzar, which is Babylon. Then he says, verse 39, there will arise another kingdom inferior to you, then another third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. Then there will be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. So like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces, all these previous kingdoms. And in that you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it will be a divided kingdom, but it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixes with common clay. Then verse 44, and in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left to another people. It will crush and put to an end all the kingdoms, but it will itself endure. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy. So if all we had was the dream, what would we conclude? If we had not been told by God through Daniel that the parts of the statue represent kingdoms, and all we had was a giant statue, and in a mountain that a rock was cut out of and destroyed the statue, and then the rock becomes a great mountain itself, what would we conclude? That there was going to be a giant statue made of these parts on the earth. But we get the interpretation that that's not what is meant by this dream, this vision that God gave to Nebuchadnezzar. And so I do that. I went to this chapter primarily to show you that in the book of Daniel, there's 4 kingdoms that are at issue. The one that Daniel is living in is the Babylonian kingdom. Historically, this is what happened. He doesn't tell us who these kingdoms are in this picture, but we know that each kingdom comes consecutively in order. And what we know from history is that Daniel was in Babylon. The Babylonians are defeated by the Medo-Persian Empire, and ultimately Persia, because Persia was the strongest of the Medes and the Persians. Persia and Media had formed an alliance. Persia was the strongest, we have Cyrus the Great, Cyrus in Babylon ruling. He lets the Jews go home from captivity. So Babylon, Medo-Persia, then rises up Greece under the leadership of Alexander the Great, who went in and conquered the Persians, primarily because they had attacked Greece under Xerxes. Now, have y'all heard of the movie, the story of the 300? Okay, that's where Persia attacks the Greeks 100 years earlier, and they go in and they sack all of the city, the states of Greece. They go into Athens and almost destroy it until the Athenians pushed them off and they went back home. Alexander the Great, who was king up in northern Greece, up in Macedonia, he vowed that he was going to punish the Persians for that, which it happened about 100 years before Alexander, not quite 100 years, about 60, I guess. He's going to punish Persia. So he rises up and he marches his army across the world and defeats everybody, all the way down into Egypt, into Israel, in all of Asia Minor, which is modern day Turkey, and then he goes into Persia and defeats the Persians. That's the third kingdom, and Alexander the Great is the general, the king that accomplished that. And then after Alexander the Great and the Greeks, Alexander is killed. He dies, and his kingdom is divided up amongst 4 of his generals. And after that, the Romans come in and take control. That's the 4th kingdom. That's history. That's not guesswork. That's history. God tells Daniel there's 4 kingdoms, consecutive order. Romans were different because instead of going in and becoming the king like Alexander did of every nation they conquered, they allowed those nations to continue with their kings, with their rulers, just like who was the king in Israel when Jesus was born? Herod. But they were under the control, the rule of the Roman Empire. So that's what it means when the feet were made of iron and clay, that there was a division in there. There was a mixture, which ultimately caused the downfall. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go over to a strong apocalyptic piece, Daniel 7. And this Daniel 7 will reappear in Revelation 17. So it's important that you get this. So Daniel is speaking here or writing. It's clear that somebody else records this. Daniel evidently recorded it and passed it down, or Daniel told it to a scribe and he wrote it down. But they'll talk about Daniel in the third person. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Okay, that's about 552 BC. 552 years before the time of Jesus. In the year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay on his bed. And then he wrote the dream down and related the following summary of it. So what we're getting is a summary. We're getting some detail. You're going to see it's pretty detailed, but we're not getting the detail that he saw because he's given us what? A summary of it. Verse 2, Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Now, we see in Revelation chapter 17, when we go there, he mentions the sea also and says that it represents the nations. So the sea represents the stirring up of the nations. And 4 great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. So what do the nations produce? 4 great beasts. were coming up from the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind also was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, resembling a bear. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I kept looking in the night vision, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying, and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boast. I kept looking until thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His vesture was like white snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was ablaze with flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands were attending him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. The court sat. The books were opened. Then I kept looking because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the vision in my mind kept alarming me. I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. So, if all we had was this vision so far, what would we conclude? That there's 4 beasts. Looks like a leopard, a lion, a leopard, a bear, and then a terrible beast that has iron teeth. And in the 4th beast, there's going to be 11 horns. Because he said 10 came up, there were 10 horns, and then another one. So how many? 11, and the 11th horn was a braggart, and was boastful, and was against God. So, should we expect that to happen? Because it hadn't happened so far, has it?
How do we know if it hasn't happened so far?
Well, have you read about a giant beast of any kind that looked like a leopard but had wings?
In the Bible here.
Well, but have you read it in history? Have you seen it? We haven't seen it. And nobody recorded seeing this other than Daniel saying that it's going to happen, but nobody has said it's happened. I mean, I think if a giant beast that had iron teeth and was crunching and killing people, that would kind of get around, wouldn't it?
Well, wait a minute. I was going along pretty good. Thinking that all of these beasts and so forth, represent countries, leaders, and so therefore, that's why you have to go back to history and try to figure out who the
Right.
Rome
Right,
so
and
forth.
that's what this first vision was. But we're looking at another vision, and it presents 4 beasts. This one had a statue with 4 parts, and we're told that the parts represent kingdoms, and that the first one was Babylon. Now we come over to chapter 7, and we're presented with 4 beasts.
They're really beasts.
Well, if we have to decide whether we're going to take it literal or figurative.
Bill,
That's my point.
Okay.
Are there connections with the first vision and the second vision? See, I was thinking this was the same vision.
No, it's not the same vision. It's a vision that has 4 parts to it, and we haven't been told yet what the 4 beasts are in this vision. Now, and my point is if we didn't have the interpretation from an angel, because he says he goes to a man who's standing there, that man is most likely an angel, and he asks him, what do these things mean? He says, okay, I'm going to tell you what they mean. We haven't read what they mean yet. But the point I'm trying to get you to see, the thing I really want you to get in your mind is that visions like this are presented with bizarre images. And if we take those bizarre images literal, then we've missed the point. Because they say they're not literal. The statue was not a literal statue. It was a vision. And the statue represented 4 kingdoms, right? How do we know that? Because they told us that's what it represents. And so I'm trying to get us so that when we read apocalyptic expressions like this, which just means visions, revelations, then our first knee-jerk should not be to take it literally. They never were. They're always taken figuratively. These are figures. The statue was a figure that represented something. What did it represent? It represented 4 kingdoms.
And
How do we know?
Are these 4 kingdoms the nations that they're talking to?
Yeah. No, they're nations that were going to rise up. Daniel was in Babylon, and so at the time of the vision, he's here. He's in Babylon. And so we're told that 4 kingdoms, 3 other kingdoms are coming, and we know historically the only 3 kingdoms that came after Babylon was Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. So we're able to know. How do I know? Because he says they were kingdoms, and one came consecutively after the other.
Okay, but you said you read in verse 244 where it says, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. So, they're taking that figuratively.
No, kingdoms are still kingdoms.
Okay.
He said that the rock strikes the statue and becomes a great mountain. That's the image. What does the image mean? He says that God's kingdom is going to destroy the statue where? At what point? During the Roman Empire.
Yes.
And set up God's kingdom. When did Jesus become king? when he was
Correct.
exalted
When he died.
at his resurrection. And so he was certainly a king, but his kingdom was not established until his resurrection, death and resurrection. So when did that happen? During the fourth kingdom, which was Rome. So the vision to Daniel was about this, about God's kingdom and basically when it's going to happen. So if we don't have the interpretation, we might come to all kinds of bizarre conclusions about it. Now let's come over to Daniel 7. We just read it, and he describes these four beasts. And Daniel's kind of, and what the last beast has got a horn, which we're going to see what those represent, that's boasting against God. So he sees that a son of man is coming to God, to the Ancient of Days, and God, there's a court set up, which means he's making a judgment, and he's making, in the context, he's making a judgment between this little horn and the Son of Man, who's really in charge, and he says, well, the Son of Man is really in charge. And he's the one that has the power and authority and kingdom forever. Okay? Well, okay, what does that mean? So he approaches an angel, wants to know what this means, and verse 17, the man, verse 16, approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. These great beasts, which are four in number, are four kings who will arise from the earth. Now, if you come down to the end of verse 22, verse 23, the first part, thus he said the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth. So he says that there are four kings, that those kings represent four kingdoms, right? So he tells us the beasts, four kingdoms, or four kings. Okay? We're told that. Okay? Would we have known that had he not told us? And would we maybe expect, because we believe God's word, that there's going to be this giant leopard with wings? Maybe. Okay. I mean, I've heard more bizarre stuff. Verse 18, but the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever for all ages to come. Then I desired to know the exact meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its claws of bronze, and which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remaining with its feet. And the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, and before which 3 of them fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth uttering great boasts, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them, until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one. And the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. So he's wanting to know about the fourth beast or kingdom and the 11 horns, and specifically the 11th. The 11th horn. So he's asking, what's my point? Well, the reason I'm going into this is because typical approaches to the book of Revelation, which is all of these images, is to mostly take it literally. And my point is that apocalyptic literature, which Daniel is a part of, was never taken that way. That's not how you read it. How do I know? Because in Daniel, an angel comes to Daniel and says, this is what these images mean. There's not going to be this giant leopard with 4 wings. Okay? But the leopard represents a kingdom. And this is what happens.
When it comes to Revelation, have all of the prophecies that were apocalyptic, have they already all, were they interpreted, or have they already taken place?
Yeah. Okay. Just like these have. He's talking about Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome. And now he's talking about we're getting ready to see what the 11 horns are and who they represent, what they represent. All of that has happened. They hadn't happened in Daniel's day, but they happened. Even though we say, wait a minute, we didn't see a beast with 11 horns. No, you're not going to, because this was an image and it had a meaning behind it. Okay? And so that's what we're going to read here. Verse 19, I desire to know the exact meaning of this. The meaning of verse 20, the meaning of the 10 horns and the little one that boasted. And I kept looking, verse 21, the horn was waging war. Verse 23, and the little horn, the 11th one, was fighting against the saints of God and was overpowering them.
I think I know
Who is it? It's not me.
Oh, it sounds like Satan,
No, it could be, but he's going to explain here.
Okay.
See, if we don't have the explanation, we can go anywhere with it.
I was.
And so let's let the angel give the interpretation of the vision. Thus he said, the angel said, the 4th beast will be a 4th kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and it will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. And so who is that 4th kingdom? Rome. So, Rome. And he describes over here the same way, that he crushed and devoured, conquered the whole earth. By the way, that kind of comes back to the question that was asked last week about where Jesus said in his statement about the judgment on Jerusalem that the gospel will be preached in the whole world. When he says that Rome ruled over the whole earth, did they? What about China? No. The known Mediterranean world, Rome ruled over, but they didn't rule the Indians here in America, Right. Okay. As for the 10 horns, verse 24, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones and will subdue 3 kings. So what does he say the horns represent? Kings. So should we take that literally? Yeah. Because he's not giving an explanation of the vision of the symbols by providing another symbol. This beast actually represents a kingdom, and the 11 horns actually represent kings. And so let's follow it. We know the kingdom is Rome. Okay, we've got the first king of Rome is Augustus. Then we have Tiberius. Then we have Caligula. have Nero. Then we have Vitellius. Then we have Titus. Then we have Domitian. Who did I leave out here? Caligula, Nero, Galba,
He's the
Otho,
fourth.
Vespasian is the sixth. So that's six. Titus is seven. Domitian is eight. This actually, Galba is the sixth. Otho is the seventh. So Vitellius, and so on. So now, part of the reason why that's confusing is he has the 9th, or he has the 11th, uprooting 3. And so you have these two, along with Vitellius, who ruled less than a year in Rome. Rome went into after Nero, Rome went into a civil war. And he has the last ruler, who is who? In this vision, Domitian. And he uproots 3. Now, why does he do that? Well, because of the apocalypse of Numbers. Numbers don't represent amounts. Numbers have got meanings behind them too. So there's special numbers, and for example, in Revelation, he talks about the number of the beast. What is the number of the beast? 666. Well, the significance of that, and then he goes on and says it's the number of man. So an angel is telling us that. So the number 6 equals man. So when we in vision, when we see the number 6, what are we supposed to think? 6 things? No, man. Okay. For all the things in the temple and that relate to God, is 7. So 7 represents divine things. How many branches were on the candelabra in the 7? And what we'll see when we go into Revelation is 7 is repeated over and over and over as it relates to God and God's things. Number 12 is used over and over and over to represent God's people. Why would 12 represent God's people? 12 tribes of Israel. And so you've got numbers and the multiplication of numbers that have meanings. 10, we're going to learn as we go in there, represents perfection or completeness. Okay, 10 is a complete number. And so it's used in Apocalypse to say that. When you see the number 10, are you supposed to say, well, there are 10 things there? No, that whatever is represented as being 10 is complete. So, and the multiples, like 12 times 12 is what? 144. That means God's people, as complete as you can get. But if you multiply it by 10, what do you get? 144,000. So that number has a meaning behind it that says all of God's people without exception. The fullness of God's people. It's not talking about a number. It's not talking about 144,000 people. Are you following me here?
Yes.
Okay. So, Domitian turns out historically came to rule in the 90s AD, and he made it his ambition to stamp out Christianity. And he waged war against the children of God. And so, who won in that battle? Jesus did. I mean, Rome decided they were going to destroy Christianity under Domitian. Domitian was the one. God is showing this to Daniel. Daniel's going to be long gone when that happens. But he passed this down so that the Christians in the first century, when they saw a warfare rising up against them and Rome had made it their destiny to stamp out Christianity, they would know this isn't taking God by surprise. He knew they were going to do it. Read Daniel. And guess who wins? It's not Domitian. It's the Son of Man that sits on the throne with God. He wins. Well, did that happen? How many of you, how many of you have been to Rome today? When you want to go find the Rome of Domitian, where do you find? If you want to find the ancient Roman Empire, there are ruins. And you got to have a tour guide to find it. But guess what you don't have to have a tour guide to find? The church. I mean, you can say, we can argue about the Catholicism and all that all we want, but, well, this thing. Okay. We can argue about the accuracy and truthfulness and all of this of the Catholic Church all we want, but what does it still represents Jesus. And who is ruling in Rome today? It's the Vatican. It's not Domitian. It's not the ancient Roman Empire. That's gone and buried. Rome is a third world nation today. I've been there many times. Okay. They're not prominent in the world today, as they were under Domitian. They ruled the world, the known world at that time. Today they barely rule themselves. And the Vatican is planted there, and guess how much they rule of the world? Everywhere that Catholicism is found. So what are you getting from this? What I want you to get is that this was a typical apocalyptic piece. A vision is presented with bizarre imagery. Monsters, you name it. And angel comes and says, well, no, there's not going to be these giant monsters roaming the earth. This is what they represent. That ought to tell us that every time we read apocalyptic stuff, literature, that we're not supposed to take it literally. We're supposed to read it as images that have meanings behind them. Even the numbers are images with meanings behind them. I mean, how many times have you heard the 144,000 is going to be the specially elect people? There's only going to be 144,000 of them. No, that's to totally disregard what apocalyptic literature is about.
It's amazing some of that, how it's passed down.
Yeah.
We've
From
inherited
that
it.
far back. For instance, that the numbers 10. You go to the doctor. What's your pain? Between 1 and 10. Women are rated. You know, what is she, a 10? I once had a guy say I was 12.
Right.
But anyway, if
That
you're
was
rated
apocalyptic.
between 1 and 10, yeah. Use your imagination.
Yeah,
Right, that one.
Okay, guys, look, I intend we'll probably hit